They say that in the dust of forgotten cities, the stones themselves remember. If you stand quietly enough, you can hear them whispers not carried by wind, but by something older, heavier, the slow exhalation of time itself. In that breath, there lingers a memory of a tower unlike any other. A structure whose shadow stretched not merely across the earth, but across the threshold between worlds. We know it as the Tower of Babel, a name woven into scripture and myth, reduced over centuries to a children's tale of pride and punishment. Yet the truth, like a buried root, runs far deeper and into far stranger soil. This was no mere monument to human ambition. It was a device, a gate, an axis where the worlds met, and they shut it down. The earliest fragments do not speak plainly of this. They were not written for the common tongue, but encoded for those who could read the currents beneath the ink. Clay tablets from the southern plains of Shinar hint at a ladder for the gods and the great mouth of the sky. Later, in temple carvings now weathered beyond recognition, artisans etched spiraling forms, towers that seemed to unravel into the clouds, vanishing into a sun not of this world. These were not crude fictions of a primitive people. They were memory carried forward, passed from civilization to civilization, each retelling reduced, until it became a parable fit for control. But control is the key to understanding why such a thing would be silenced. The tower was not destroyed because it offended heaven, it was dismantled because it worked. Imagine a structure so precisely attuned to the rhythms of earth and sky that its very stones hummed with alignment. A resonance capable of thinning the membrane between realms. Through it, one could walk into the corridors between realities where thought becomes form and time becomes pliable. To those who built it, this was not magic, but knowledge. Knowledge inherited perhaps from a civilization that preceded all recorded history. To those who later inherited power, it was a threat too great to leave standing. And so the story we were given became one of hubris humans, defying the gods, punished with division of language. But beneath that moral lies a coded truth. The confusion of tongues may not have been the multiplication of words, but the fragmentation of a singular frequency. A harmony once shared between all who stood at the tower's base. Imagine a chorus suddenly silenced not by noise, but by the removal of the one note that bound them together. That is what it means to shut down a portal. It is not merely to destroy its walls, but to sever the resonance that gave it life. For centuries, the sands of Mesopotamia have hidden the true foundations. Scholars excavate ziggurats and call them temples to the gods. But what if these were not temples at all, but tuning forks in stone? What if their tiered ascents mirrored not only the climb toward the divine, but the gradual attunement of the human frame to a higher field of reality? The builders, I suspect, were not reaching up to heaven, they were opening out, peeling back the veils that divide worlds. Those veils have grown thick again. Our histories have been smoothed, edited, made safe for the classroom. The Tower of Babel is now little more than a footnote, a moral allegory. And yet across cultures, there are persistent echoes. The world tree of the Norse, the sacred mountain of the Maya, the stepped pyramids of Egypt and the Andes. Each is described as the axis of the world, the meeting point of earth and sky, the place where the gods descend. In each, we see a fractured memory of a single once whole truth that our ancestors knew how to walk between realms, and that someone, somewhere, decided we should forget. To read the old accounts with unclouded eyes is to feel the hair rise along the arms. In the Book of Jubilees, it is said the tower was built over 43 years, its summit higher than the clouds. In Sumerian traditions, there are hints of a bond heaven-earth, a link forged by sacred geometry. And in the scattered myths of peoples far from Shinar, there are tales of a great ladder or bridge always broken, always forbidden to climb again. It is as if humanity remembers in dream what it may no longer build in waking life. The shutting down of the tower was more than the loss of stone and mortar. It was the closing of a gate that once made the human story part of a vaster, interwoven cosmos. That closure reshaped history, locked us in a smaller world, one bounded by the sky and the ground beneath our feet. In that sense, all of history since has been the story of living inside the lock, forgetting there was ever a key. But keys have a way of resurfacing, in scattered texts, in anomalous ruins, in patterns etched across the earth's ley lines. The shape of the old truth stirs. It whispers in the language of symbol spirals, ladders, the meeting of twin pillars, the arc between sun and moon. And for those who can hear it, the question arises, was the portal closed to protect us from what lay beyond, or to keep us from returning to a place we once belonged? To step into that question is to begin a dangerous remembering. It is to challenge the smooth stories we've been given, and to let the cracks in history widen, revealing the older strata beneath. The real Tower of Babel was a portal, and it was shut down. But the shutting was not the end. It was only the sealing of a chapter 1 that may now, in the tremors of our time, be ready to open again. If the introduction is the stirring of dust on a long-forgotten page, then here we turn the leaf fully, letting the inked lines emerge under the light. To understand the real Tower of Babel as a portal, one must step far beyond the sanitized corridors of academic history and into the labyrinth where the fragments of forbidden knowledge still lie scattered like broken tiles from a shattered mosaic. The first stones in this path lie in the ancient land of Shinar, what the later world would call Sumer, Akkad, Babylon. Here, long before the ink of the Bible was pressed to parchment, there were the Etemenanki and the Ziggurats, colossal tiered platforms rising like steps for giants. Archaeology insists they were merely temples, platforms for priests to approach the gods with offerings. But there are accounts in the faint lines of cuneiform that describe them differently. Not as houses for deities, but as bond heaven-earth instruments meant to bind the terrestrial realm to the celestial. These are not the words of symbolic piety. They are the language of engineering, of resonance. When you stand before a surviving ziggurat, even in ruin, you feel the geometry before you comprehend it. Its base is aligned with the cardinal points. Its proportions echo the ratios found in the orbit of the moon and the precession of the equinoxes. These alignments are not decorative. In many ancient cultures, sacred architecture was designed to tune the surrounding space, much as a harp string must be brought to the right pitch before it can carry a song. The builders of Babel may well have been tuning not sound, but the subtle structure of reality itself. Some sources, rare, often dismissed, speak of materials not native to Mesopotamia used in the uppermost levels of the tower. Bitumen, for sealing against forces not of weather. Certain metallic inlays, perhaps to conduct or amplify whatever field the structure generated. If one accepts the premise that it was a portal, then such details take on new clarity. The tower becomes less a religious monument and more a machine, a precisely engineered device for altering the state of the space it occupied. We must also weigh the testimony of parallel myths. The Hopi speak of Sipapu openings between worlds. The Dogon recall a cosmic stairway, withdrawn after misuse. In the myths of the Maya, there is a sky cord severed in an age before ours. Each is a whisper of the same rupture, a conduit between realms, built or bestowed, and then removed. The biblical account says the tower's builders sought to make a name for themselves, lest they be scattered. This phrase, to the casual reader, is about pride. But in the older languages, name is not ego, it is frequency, identity, the precise tone by which something is known across realms. To make a name may have meant to anchor their civilization's frequency so strongly that it could traverse the threshold unbroken. To be scattered is not simply to disperse physically, but to lose the coherence of that shared tone. Here again, the story points less to divine punishment and more to the deliberate collapse of a unifying resonance. Consider too the timing. If the portal functioned, it would not only allow travel between worlds, it might allow communication across vast gulfs of space or time. Such a technology in the hands of a united human civilization could render earthly kings and priesthoods irrelevant. The scattering of languages then becomes a political act, an ancient form of disconnection and control. The shutdown of the portal is not the wrath of heaven. It is the strategy of those who would monopolize the path between realms. Some scholars of the esoteric traditions whisper that the tower's core function was rooted in sound. Before it was stones, it was tones. The tower's design, they say, was built to magnify chants and harmonic vibrations until they reached a threshold where matter itself could shift. This is not idle mysticism. In the temples of Egypt, in the sacred caves of Tibet, in the stone chambers of Ireland, there are rooms whose resonance is so perfect that a human voice can seem to make the walls themselves tremble. If the Tower of Babel scaled that principle to a monumental degree, then its builders were conducting a kind of alchemy in the air, a fusion of architecture and frequency that could open doors no key could touch. And yet in every surviving account, the end is the same. The construction halted, the people dispersed, the link was broken. The portal, if it had truly been opened, was shut. What remains to us now are ruins and stories, enough to hint at the whole, never enough to rebuild without the missing knowledge. It is worth noting that even the destruction may not have been complete. Some traditions say the foundations remain buried not in the literal earth, but beneath the overlay of centuries, awaiting a moment when the conditions, astronomical, energetic, human, align once more. There are those who claim that scattered ziggurats and pyramids across the world are fragments of the same global system, each a node in a web that once wrapped the earth, all resonating in unison. The tower at Babel may have been the central pillar, the keystone of this network. Its removal then was not simply about one structure, but about collapsing the entire field. We find ourselves in a strange position. Modernity has stripped the story of its machinery and left us with a parable. Yet when we place that parable alongside the physical evidence, the old alignments, the cross-cultural myths, the encoded language, the possibility emerges with startling force. The Tower of Babel was the most sophisticated device of the ancient world, and it was silenced, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. The question that remains is not whether such a portal existed, but what exactly lay on the other side, and who decided that humanity should no longer have the map. If the historical record is the skeleton of the tower's truth, then its symbolic narratives are the living flesh, warm, pulsing, and ancient, as the breath of the first storyteller who dared to speak its name aloud. For long before the word Babel was etched into any clay tablet, the essence of its meaning had already taken root in the mythic memory of humankind. And it is here in these deeper layers that the true contours of the portal emerge, not as a mere structure, but as an archetype embedded in the architecture of the cosmos. The most persistent symbol is the axis mundi, the world axis, the invisible pillar around which all of creation turns. Every culture remembers it differently. To the Sumerians, it was the bond heaven-earth, the sacred tether binding the divine realm to the human. To the Norse, it was Yggdrasil, the ash tree whose roots drink from the well of memory, and whose crown brushes the realm of the gods. The ancient Chinese envisioned the Kunlun mountain, a radiant peak where immortals gathered, and from which the rivers of life flowed. The common thread is unmistakable, a single central connector, a bridge not only between the physical and the spiritual, but between worlds. The Tower of Babel fits seamlessly into this archetype, its spiraling form mirroring the cosmic ladder, or the twisting serpent of creation myths. The spiral itself is no idle choice. It is the geometry of galaxies, of whirlpools, of the unfurling fern, the curve that leads from the finite into the infinite. To climb such a form symbolically is to ascend through layers of reality, each tier a shedding of density, until the summit delivers you into the open expanse beyond form. But the symbolic story of Babel also hides in its most famous punishment, the confusion of tongues. On the surface, it reads as divine retribution. But in the symbolic lexicon of the ancients, language is not simply words, it is the vibration of thought itself. In the beginning of many creation stories, the world is sung or spoken into being. In Egypt, Ta brings the world forth by the heart's thought and the tongue's command. In the Hebrew tradition, creation is called into existence through the divine word. To disrupt language, then, is to disrupt creation, to scatter the capacity for unified manifestation. Thus, the confusion can be read as the shattering of a single pure frequency into countless fragments, much like breaking a beam of light into a rainbow. Each fragment retains beauty, but the original coherent force is lost. The portal that was the Tower of Babel may have required this unity, a singular harmonized vibration of human intention, to function. When the languages were scattered, the harmony broke and the gate closed. Other symbols deepen the picture. In some esoteric readings, the tower is not only a bridge, but a mirror, an image of the human spine. The base corresponds to the root grounded in earth, the summit to the crown open to the divine. In this view, the building of the tower is the collective awakening of humanity, the rising of energy from the base upward, activating each level until the crown opens into the higher worlds. The shutting down of the portal becomes the severing of this upward flow, a fall into lower states of consciousness, mirrored in the scattering of peoples across the earth. This fracturing of the human mind is reflected in myths far beyond the Near East. In the Vedic traditions, there is the story of the churning of the ocean, a cosmic collaboration between gods and demons, to bring forth the nectar of immortality, interrupted and ultimately corrupted by deception. In the myths of the Andes, there are bridges between worlds destroyed by floods or fire, when humans grew too close to the realm of the gods. These are not random parallels. They are cultural echoes of a singular ancient memory, a time when the boundary between the human and the divine was thin, and a rupture ended that intimacy. Even the name Babel hides a dual meaning. In Akkadian, Babilu means gate of God, a direct pointer to its portal function. In Hebrew, Balal means to confuse or mix. The fusion of these two meanings, gate and confusion, is the symbolic heart of the story, a door deliberately clouded, a threshold obscured, so that it might never be crossed again. The name itself is an encoded warning, and a map depending on who reads it. And then, there is the serpent, the ever-present symbol of hidden knowledge. In Mesopotamian cylinder seals, a coiled serpent appears beside stepped towers, its body spiraling upward, its head poised toward the sky. The serpent is both the guardian of the portal and the guide through it, representing the wisdom required to ascend, without being destroyed by what lies beyond. To those uninitiated, the serpent is a danger. To those prepared, it is the path. In the Babel narrative, the serpent is absent from the surface, telling, but its shadow coils beneath, as if intentionally erased from the visible record. Through these symbolic layers, a more complex image emerges. The Tower of Babel is not just a building of the past, it is the eternal image of humanity's bridge to the infinite. The spine of the world tree, the central pillar of the temple that exists in every age and every place where the human spirit reaches beyond itself. Its destruction in the symbolic register is not merely historical, it is the wound of disconnection, the collective amnesia that settled over us when the gate was closed. And yet, symbols do not die. They sleep, and in dreams, the tower still stands. Its spiral still rises through the mists, and the languages are still one in the silence before speech. Those who walk the inner path can still find its base deep within the architecture of their own being, where the ancient gate waits not broken, but sealed until the harmony is restored. If the Tower of Babel is more than myth, if it was indeed a functioning portal, a bridge between worlds, and if its shutdown was an intentional act, then we are forced to ask a dangerous question. What does that mean for us now? The answer, like the tower itself, is layered. It touches the political, the technological, the spiritual, and even the biological fabric of our existence. First, the political. A working portal, one capable of linking distant realms or states of being, would represent the most disruptive technology in human history. It would make borders meaningless, economies irrelevant, hierarchies obsolete. The power structures of any age, from ancient priest-kings to modern nation-states, depend on the control of movement, knowledge, and exchange. If the tower truly opened a pathway where none of these could be controlled, then its destruction was not the wrath of the divine, but the strategic preservation of centralized power. The scattering of languages, whether literal or vibrational, ensured that no united voice could ever again sing "Open the Gate." This is not a problem confined to the past. Even today, our world is defined by fragmentation, nations divided, ideologies in conflict, languages and cultures fenced off from one another. The unity that might allow us to rediscover a shared frequency is continually undermined, sometimes by accident, often by design. The shutting down of Babel was not just a single act. It set a template for how power manages humanity: divide, confuse, scatter. And so the echoes of the tower's fall reverberate in our geopolitics, in our media, in our fractured identities. Then the technological. The idea of an ancient portal may seem implausible until we recall that our ancestors were no strangers to engineering marvels we still cannot replicate. The Great Pyramid's precision, the basalt columns of Nan Madol, the astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe, each points to an understanding of physics and geometry that modern science barely approaches. If the Tower of Babel was a harmonic resonator, capable of shifting matter or consciousness across realms, it suggests that our current technology is a pale shadow of something we once held. And this raises another possibility. What if fragments of that technology survived? Certain patterns of sacred architecture, stepped pyramids, megalithic circles, temple grids aligned to solstices, may be remnants of a global network once tuned to the same frequency as the tower. In our time, scientists speak of quantum entanglement, wormholes, and the manipulation of space-time. The ancient builders may have been doing something similar, not with super colliders and particle beams, but with stone sound and cosmic alignment. To rediscover such knowledge could alter the trajectory of our civilization overnight. Yet it also carries the risk that it would be quickly weaponized, as all great tools are in the hands of fractured minds. Then the spiritual implications. If the tower was an axis mundi, then its shutdown represents not only the loss of a physical bridge, but the closing of an inner door. Humanity's spiritual traditions, from shamanic vision journeys to mystical ascent narratives, can be read as attempts to reopen this door within. In meditation, in altered states, in the moment between waking and sleeping, some still find themselves at the base of a great spiral or ladder compelled to climb. That image is not random. It is the echo of a shared human memory, a map imprinted in the psyche. In this sense, the real Tower of Babel is not only a ruin in Mesopotamian soil, but a latent structure in the human soul. Its shutdown historically may have been mirrored by a deliberate suppression of human capacities, psychic, telepathic, or otherwise, The scattering of languages can be seen as the scattering of consciousness itself, the severing of the unified field that allowed direct communion between minds and with the cosmos. To heal that fracture is to begin rebuilding the tower within. And finally, the biological thread. If language is vibration, and vibration shapes matter, then the harmonics of the original Babel frequency may have once tuned not only human consciousness, but human DNA. In a world united by a single resonant name, perhaps our biology operated differently, expanded capacities, heightened senses, longer lifespans. The confusion of tongues may have been in effect a reprogramming of the human template. If that is so, then rediscovering the tower's true name could act as a kind of key unlocking dormant aspects of what it means to be human. But there is a shadow to all of this. If the tower's shutdown was an act of control, it was also possibly an act of containment. A portal is not selective by nature, it opens both ways. What came through might have been wondrous, or it might have been catastrophic. In myths across the world, bridges between realms are destroyed, not only to keep humans out of the divine, but to keep something else from entering our world unchecked. The same serpent that guides can also strike. The same ladder that leads to light can descend into shadow. And so we stand in the long aftermath of Babel, holding fragments of its memory in our stories, our symbols, our ruins. The real-world implication is as stark as it is profound. We may still possess the potential to rebuild the portal both outwardly and inwardly. But to do so wisely requires something our ancestors perhaps lacked: a unity, not only of language and intention, but of heart. Without that, the same forces that shut the gate once may do so again. Or worse, allow it to open at a moment when we are unprepared for what lies beyond. The question then is not simply whether the Tower of Babel was real, nor even whether it was a portal. The question is whether we in our time could bear the responsibility of opening it again, and whether deep down some part of us has been preparing for that moment all along. It is a strange thing to end where one began. We began with a whisper, a murmur from the dust of forgotten cities, hinting at a tower whose shadow stretched, not across the horizon, but across the unseen architecture of reality itself. We followed that whisper, through fragments of history, through the intricate weave of symbol and myth, through the unsettling possibilities of what such a structure could mean for us now. And here at the close, we find ourselves standing again at its base, not in the sands of Shinar, but in the quiet inner space, where all journeys resolve. The real Tower of Babel, if we accept its reality, was never just stone. It was intention made manifest. A unity of human purpose tuned so precisely that it could pierce the veil between worlds. Its builders were not merely masons, but participants in a cosmic alignment, standing as both witnesses to and architects of a moment when heaven and earth were not separate, but intertwined. The tower's fall was not a natural ruin. It was a deliberate severing, a decision that humanity would walk a longer, harder road before such a crossing could be attempted again. Yet here is the truth. The myth cannot bury. Doors closed can be opened. Seals can be broken. Frequencies once lost can be remembered. The axis mundi is not only a pillar in the center of the world, it is the invisible thread that runs through each of us. In every dream of flight, in every sudden knowing, in every deep silence where the heart feels larger than the body, the tower stands again. We do not see its bricks, but we feel its height. We do not hear the language of unity, but we recognize its echo in the moments when understanding flows wordlessly between beings. And perhaps that is the transformational secret hidden in the Babel story. The portal was never meant to be solely a machine outside ourselves. It was and is a mirror of the human spirit's capacity to bridge realms, The scattering of languages forced us inward to find that bridge again. Within. In our myths, we have rehearsed it. In our temples, we have mapped it. In our sciences, we have circled closer to it than we realize. And in our quiet moments, we have touched it, however briefly, without knowing its name. To live with this awareness is to carry a certain double vision. One eye sees the ruins, the fractured world, the scattered tribes, the broken communication between nations and hearts. The other eye sees the hidden blueprint still intact, still glowing beneath the surface. That blueprint does not belong to a single people or age. It is the inheritance of the entire human family waiting for the moment when the frequency is restored. But restoration will not come through the building of a monument alone. It will not come from technologies in the hands of those who hunger for power. It will come from the slow, deliberate reweaving of the fabric torn at Babel's fall. It will come when language once again serves connection, not division. When the tones of our speech, thought, and action harmonize. When our inner towers rise, not in rivalry, but in resonance. If the ancient builders misused their gift, perhaps their legacy is to challenge us to do better, to stand at the edge of the portal, not with pride, but with reverence. To remember that whatever lies beyond is not merely a prize to be claimed, but a responsibility to be shared. The portal is a threshold to the unknown, and the unknown reflects us back. To cross it unprepared is to invite chaos. To cross it united is to step into a greater order. So we close this scroll with an invitation. Do not look for the Tower of Babel only in the dust of old empires. Look for it in the patterns of the stars, in the spirals of seashells, in the sudden flashes of understanding between strangers, in the moments when time seems to pause and the air hums with something unspoken. These are the outer edges of the same gate. They remind us that the portal was never truly destroyed. It was simply hidden, awaiting those who would learn to approach it in harmony. The story of Babel is not the story of a failure, but the story of a pause. And perhaps now, the long pause is ending. Perhaps the keys are returning, one by one, in dreams, in discoveries, in the quiet courage of those who dare to unite in a fractured world. If so, then one day soon, the tower will rise again, not in defiance, but in remembrance, its summit vanishing into the same light from which it first descended. And when that day comes, we will not be scattered. We will not be silenced. We will step forward together, and the gate will open, and we will remember that we were never meant to walk this earth alone.